So not exactly how I was hoping this video was going to start out, but things could be a lot worse. I put fluids in the car the other day, and then the following day I noticed there was a bunch of coolant on the ground. So I went through, made sure all the hoses were tight, they were good. I've had issues with the heater hoses back there leaking in the past, but I've figured that out and I was like, I know those are tight. So I just double checked because there was coolant leaking from this area back here. So I put a little bucket under the heater hoses, let it sit for a couple hours. There was nothing in there. It was still dripping down the side of the bell housing. And I was getting really worried that maybe this head was warped, or the head gasket was split, or the rear head bolt was, I don't know. Like, my mind obviously went straight to thinking of the worst case scenario possible, because that's what happens when something goes wrong and you're on a time crunch. But after looking at it further, it is the steam port kit. So I don't know if I didn't tighten all the fittings. I forgot to put Teflon on some of them, so I think it's a combination of that, and if they're also not tight. But there was a ton of coolant on the valley cover here, and it was just dripping down the back, dripping right on the head bolt. So when I was looking down there, that's where I thought it was coming from, dripping down the bell housing, going all the way to the bottom. And that's as much as it was leaking for, I don't know, maybe the past 20-30 minutes. So over the past day or two, it's definitely lost a lot of coolant. Got the intake off, gonna go through, tighten up those fittings, make sure everything is good, plug everything back in, and then start getting to work on hopefully starting this thing up later this afternoon. I got everything back together here. That steam port kit I had on the car just was not working. Every fitting was leaking on it for some reason. It's something with the flares on it. They just don't want to seal. I thought it was the little distribution block in the center because there was no Teflon on the fittings going into those. So put some Teflon on it, tightened it down, put it back on the car, and it was still leaking. So it was leaking from like 3 or 4 fittings, and I tried tightening it up. I didn't want to strip anything. They're just aluminum fittings. So I just took it off, tossed the old setup back on the car. It'll work for now. I eventually do want to have a steam port kit on it, but this is just as a front crossover that goes into the water pump here, and then the back just has block off plates there. Between that and having to drop the rack and pinion to tighten up the power steering line fittings, I think I got everything that I know of as of right now kind of situated. So I just spent some time, tossed the parameters for a tune in the car, and with any luck here, I'm hoping to fire it up sometime tonight. I'm not gonna lie, I am pretty nervous. Obviously, this will be a telltale sign of what's gonna happen for the next week here, but also everything on this car is fresh, it's new. Spent a lot of work, time, and money into it, so I don't know. I got a couple things I want to keep an eye on, but other than that, let's get this thing fired up and I guess hear what it sounds like between the new engine, the new cam, and of course the headers here. All right, it's been an interesting past few days on this thing. I got it started up Sunday night for the first time. It is now Wednesday night, and I've had a whole bunch of different issues to sort out. The first issue I had was when I started up, it would rev to like 2,500 RPM, like at idle. So I had the throttle cable adjusted wrong, got that fixed, and then once I would get the thing to idle right, it kept backfiring, and it was like a really loud pop. You could hear it over the car, and it was pretty consistent. So I did some digging and tried to figure some stuff out. I was just chasing around, like, is the ground on the back of the head not cleaned off enough? Is that not good? Double checked if the coil harness plugs were for the correct side, the injector plugs were on the right ones, and they were. I triple checked that when I had the intake off the other day as well. So I was like starting to kind of freak out that something was internally wrong, but it ended up being a simple fix. Thankfully, I had this coil harness backwards. These are new ones, and I just had it flipped pretty much 180 degrees, because after I pulled the plugs, These rear two here were completely clean, bone dry, wasn't firing at all. So that's what was kind of leading me towards it's either something with the coils or injectors. Thankfully, it was that swap. I had a pretty good fuel leak coming from the back of my fuel pressure sensor, so I got that sorted out, took the line off, tightened it, and then I had a coolant leak from the bottom radiator hose. Think I got that sorted out as well. And then the steering over here has been giving me a bunch of issues. I didn't have this bottom half of the steering shaft in, and when I went to go put it in, the little Allen heads that go into that coupler right there, that one was stripped. I couldn't get these bottom ones to align, so I went out and got all new hardware, re-threaded and tapped the threads in that coupler and this coupler down here, and it all seems to be fine. So I just got the O2 disabled for right now, because when I had it idling the other night, it would be fine for like a minute or so, and then it would run really rich and then just eventually kill itself. So I got that disabled just to see if I can get this thing to idle and be all right. It really needs the rest of the exhaust to run properly, just because the O2 is so close to the end of the collector on the header. So I'm gonna go ahead, fire it up. Fingers crossed I got all these issues that I've been battling the past few days figured out. And if everything's looking good, maybe take it for a test drive tonight or tomorrow, and then do the exhaust and hopefully go for a much longer test drive before I gotta leave in 4 days now. So at this point, I set the camera down and just focused on getting things done. I didn't really record much throughout the last few days because I still had a pretty strong list of things that need to be knocked out. So I'm gonna do a quick rundown of what happened and then how the trip went on Power Tour this year. It took me probably 3 or 4 days to get the car running and running right. There's a couple different issues like I showed you guys, and then the Friday and Saturday before I left Sunday to go down to Bowling Green for day one of Power Tour. I started and finished the exhaust, which ended up being a lot more intensive project than expected, as is everything. There's a couple things I want to redo on it, but it is just an X pipe that goes straight out to the boom tubes on the side, so it just comes straight back through the headers. I had to make some notches in the cross member, which was the part that just took some time. I still got to go back and kind of finish that up, so that'll be worked on here in the future. But it's pretty simple, just 2.5-inch stainless. Like I said, goes to next pipe straight out to the boom tubes on the side. I got to go through and make new mounts with some new hangers I got. After I got the exhaust finished, I set the car back down on the ground. At this point, it's like Saturday at probably 9 or 10 p.m., somewhere around there. Fired the car up and I actually drove it around the property here, and there was a couple different issues. My biggest issue is I had a pretty strong oil leak that I couldn't figure out where it was coming from at first. It ended up being the dipstick, the spot where it went into the block, and that was because I couldn't get the O-ring on the dipstick tube and then get the dipstick in there because the header was in the way. So I gotta take the header off anyway, and that'll allow me to actually like slide the dipstick tube into the block. So that shouldn't be a problem anymore. But for that week, I went ahead and just put a plug with some RTV on it in the hole in the block, and it hasn't leaked since. I had a couple other little things, like my steering wheel wasn't aligned in the slightest. I had a couple leaks here and there, but nothing too major. The only other big thing was I had a charging issue, which was an issue from the past that I had towards the end of last year, but we ended up fixing it on Power Tour, so I'll get to that here in just a second. Other than that, I finally drove the car to the gas station and the car wash at about 1 a.m. on Sunday morning. Everything was looking okay minus that charging issue, and woke up at 5 a.m. and decided to head down 500 miles to Bowling Green for the start of Power Tour. Met up with my buddy Brad along the way over in Indiana, and then once we got out of Indianapolis, just across the border into Kentucky, met up with my dad and my brother, and we finished the drive all the way down to Bowling Green. Everything was smooth, which was a pretty nice relief after a lot of work and a fair amount of stress those last few days if the car was going to make it or not. So morning of day one, we went ahead and got the charging issue solved. Had to add a little resistor in line to the alternator because the alternator was getting all 12 volts. Did not want that, dropped it down to about 5, and then it still was giving us a couple little issues, and that's because the main power wire on the starter solenoid was loose and had a little bit of rust on the back side of the nut, which is kind of weird because I just replaced that, like I said, towards the end of last year. Took some sandpaper, cleaned that up, tightened that up, and that solved that, thankfully, because I was getting pretty worried. We tested pretty much everything, had a couple people around trying to figure it out, and thankfully it was just an easy solution like that. Went to the venue for Monday, and on my way there, the car got up to about 230, 240 temperature-wise, so I just kind of parked it off in a field by the track and decided to let it just sit there while we went into the venue, did whatever, saw some people, and then came back, decided to fix it later. Thankfully, it was just another simple fix. My ground stud for the fan relays was loose. I honestly don't know if I forgot to tighten it while assembling everything or if it rattled loose on the drive down, but got that tightened up and didn't go above 200 the rest of the week. So pretty happy with that, and those were the only two issues that the car had throughout the entire week. Day two, we had some pretty cool driving. Went to Nashville. That was cool. Just pretty much like a normal road trip day. We ended up staying outside the venue for about an hour, hour and a half, waiting for the line to kind of go down, which is cool. And then after we went in there, we were actually able to go inside the track, and we were actually able to get up on the track, which was pretty awesome. We had all the cars parked in turn 4, which was really cool. Didn't expect that to ever happen. We all get to drive on pit road back inside the infield as well, and then we all kind of hung out outside the track after, and yeah, it's a pretty solid day. Day 3, we drove from Nashville to Louisville, and that was a really cool drive. We ended up not getting to the venue with pretty much 10 minutes to spare. Some of us got there after it closed, which was at 6, but that was nice. We all kind of just hung out there for a little bit, and there was a nice empty parking lot at the end of the day there, so decided to I guess do some celebration donuts for finishing this thing. First time like I really beat on this car since it's been back together. I probably had 1,000 miles on the car at that point. I just didn't want to dump the clutch because it's a brand new clutch. So I just kind of rolled into it, and yeah, this thing's a lot more powerful with this engine than the last setup, so it was pretty fun. All went to dinner that night, and then Thursday we went into Ohio. That was a pretty cool drive, although it was mostly highway driving. There's a couple cool back roads in the morning, but nothing too crazy there. And all week Brad was helping me tune this thing because I know enough to kind of plug in information into the little Holley touchscreen there and get it up and running. I wouldn't say it was running great, but it was running obviously enough to make it down there. But he plugged his laptop in, which was the first time this car has ever had a laptop plugged into it to get tuned. So there was a lot of things that needed to be fixed, but I'm very thankful that he was there the whole week to make adjustments and get this car running the best it has ever had, honestly, with an engine like this in it. Dialing that in all week, and there's a couple little issues. Didn't have to do much work on the car, thankfully. Some other people in the group had some minor issues, but overall there was no crazy like catastrophes or engine replacements or anything like that, which was pretty good, because honestly I was kind of beat after thrashing on this thing. I wanted to just drive it and hang out with everyone and enjoy the week, and quite frankly that's why I didn't really film anything. But wrapping up with the last day, we went to Lucas Oil Raceway in Indiana, and we got there pretty early. The earliest I think we made it to a venue all week, so we were able to kind of walk around and see some things. Got the long hauler plaque, which was cool. That is 3 in a row for this car, which is pretty cool. And I think that's Power Tour like number 12 or 13 for myself, and my dad number 4 with this car. But overall, yeah, good time. Like I said, I'm gonna throw in a bunch of pictures and clips while I'm talking here of kind of the week, but I don't really film much. And there we go. Got the other long hauler plaque up next to last year's. Got a really cool Polaroid of the car right there. Got tons of other pictures of it as well. But this is the car in its current state. Obviously, there still needs to be a lot of things done left to it. It's nowhere near where I want it to be. They never are. But after all that work over the past 2 months, I feel like I did accomplish a fair amount and accomplish the goal of, number 1, making the trip, and number 2, having a solid, complete car. Once it's all said and done, you can see the whole new engine bay came together pretty well. Same thing that you guys have seen over the last few videos. The headers have started to color themselves pretty nice, which is good. Just went through and got everything wiped down and cleaned up after all that road grime. I do have a list of probably, I don't know, 10, 15 issues that need to be addressed. Not really stuff that I necessarily want to do, but stuff that more or less needs to be done, along with a couple things that I would like to do as well. Kind of decided I'm gonna leave the interior alone for now. Just leave the tunnel with some primer on it, because at some point I do want to put a roll cage in this, and I don't want to go through and repaint the floor, do a bunch of work inside, because there's a bunch of different panels I want to make and whatnot, have to tear it all apart or change anything when it comes time to put a cage in this. Interior is just gonna stay as it is for now. It's not that big of a deal, but when the time comes for that, I have an idea in my head of what I want to do with everything. But other than that, it's pretty sound and running pretty good right now. Roughly 1,800 miles for myself in this car on the whole trip. So call that a win. But like I said, in the next video, I'm gonna go through and fix a couple different things, adjust some things. We'll nut and bolt the whole car. I gotta make a couple different brackets and miscellaneous pieces. So should be some interesting stuff. Got to do some more work with the exhaust, and then I'm just gonna enjoy the car for the rest of the summer, because it sat for almost 10 months over this past year, which is the longest that this car has sat with either me not driving it or working on it. So after all this work, I would like to enjoy it the rest of the summer here, after about a week or two of kind of adjustments and fixes on this setup. Gonna bring the charger back in here, and we'll get back on that here hopefully soon.